Hello guys, on today's video we'll be talking about project proposal. We usually need a proposal for your undergraduate program, master's program or PhD program, and as well when you're looking for funding grants for your project. Now, how do we structure this all important proposal or article that will get you approved and get you started? Let's check out in this video. On today's video, we're talking about what a research proposal is all about. We'll talk about the essential ingredients that make up a good research proposal, and then I'll walk you through the typical arrangement or pattern for a research proposal, the general templates despite your school or location, wherever you are. So without any further ado, let's just go ahead with the video. What is a research proposal? It's a comprehensive article you write to your supervisor and or with a committee or board members to convince them on why your research is actually worthwhile, why it should be listened to, why it should be approved. Now, majorly you're trying to convince them about three things. To convince them that you identified and articulated very well a good research problem, and then two, that your research problem actually covers a gap. It's worthwhile and will add to the body of knowledge. You're not trying to just give us a review and yet keep us where we are. No, your research should be able to cover a gap specifically. And then finally, you're trying to convince them that your research topic is actually realistic. Okay, within the time frame you have, within the resources available to you, are you able to carry out the research? Imagine that someone is running the test and wants to cover up to 100 sample of a very rare case. Okay, it's not realistic in the sense that such cases are not very rampant. It's not very easy to get. So even if you, mostly if it's an undergraduate, you have a limited time. A PhD has limited time, but it depends on your time frame. So all these things should be well articulated in your proposal. Is it realistic within the time frame you have? Okay, so another example could be someone that wants to research on the customer relationship with CEO at Amazon and their employees. Now the question, is it realistic? Do you have access to Amazon? Do you have access to the CEO? Do you have access to the employees at Amazon? So these are things that should be very, very clear in your proposal. Okay, now a typical structure of a good research proposal. This should be a title, background of study, problem statement, research objectives, specific objectives, delimitations of study, definition of terms, literature review, methodology, budget, timeline, referencing, and appendix. Now, when we begin through and take you through the practical aspect, we'll explain all these things in much details. So let's go to the next slide and see what's that all about. Okay, so primarily this is a Word document, Microsoft Word. You can actually use Google document also, but I love to use Word document. So now this is a typical example. First of all, you're writing the institution name and then a project proposal, and then we'll go through a topic. Now a topic will still cover a video on how to find a topic, and then where you can find a topic, how to find a gap. We'll cover that in a separate video. But when you're crafting your topic, don't be too strict on yourself, because your topic can be changed by your supervisor. But first of all, find a topic and structure it very well, and then even if they change it later, that's still fine. But give you the structure of your topic is actually very straightforward and very specific. Correlation of interleukin and albumin creatinine ratio with disease severity in sickle cell subjects in a steady state. Now this is a very straightforward correlation topic. So that's the placement, and then we talk about your name, your number, and your supervisor name. If you have two supervisors, they can be imputed here. And then this a research proposal in partial fulfillment for the course of study, whichever means you're writing. Okay, and then the dates, a month and a year, and then the city where you are. Okay, so that's primarily the front page, the title page of your research proposal. So that's just what should be in your title page. Now, table of contents. This is where you arrange what we are about to see in your project proposal. Anything not stated in table of contents shouldn't be outlined in your work. Okay, so it's best that you state everything that should be part of your main work in the table of content. That way someone can easily have access to this. One thing you should note is that this should be very well arranged. Okay, try to make it well arranged and aligned. This is usually your first approach and your first impression with your supervisor. So as much as you can, make everything very, very neat. Look for someone that has a good knowledge of Word, Microsoft Word, and make sure your work is arranged very neatly so that you make a very good impression, first impression with your supervisor. This is very crucial because you're playing a long-term game with your supervisor. You don't want to start on a wrong note with a lot of errors and arrangement errors that can be avoided. Okay, so materials and method, study design, we'll still talk about this. Okay, sampling, time frame. Okay, so introduction. When you're writing an introduction, I will use this topic that we have as a baseline for our example. Now, if you check the topic again, we're talking about sickle cell. We're talking about a correlation of interleukin and albumin creatinine ratio with these people in steady state, with sickle cell patients in steady state. Now, what we are primarily trying to do in introduction is to define the key terms in those topics. So first of all, we'll start with an origin of sickle cell disease. Then we'll go through the global effects, the statistics, how sickle cell has ravaged the world at large. Then you're narrowing it down to Africa, because I'm using Africa as an example. Then narrowing it down to your state, your city, wherever you are. Just you're narrowing it down. That's the difference between writing a project and writing an assignment. In assignments, you're primarily going wider. You're discussing many things, but not so in research writing. In research writing, you're trying to go narrow. The more narrow you are, the more deep you go in a specific area, the better your research. So primarily, you're going. It's like a pyramid. Okay, a pyramid going from a larger scale, from a wider scale to a very narrow scale. So that's what you're doing in your introduction. Then you talk about the background of study. Now this is where you begin to mention other key areas in your topic. Now we talked about steady states and crisis states. Okay, in sickle cell, then we began to define some parameters. We mentioned two parameters there: interleukin and albumin creatinine ratio, and how it relates to sickle cell disease. Now you're going to really tell us how these topics actually relate to sickle cell, how these parameters actually relate to sickle cell disease. Okay, now once you're done with your background of study, next should be a statement of problem.
Hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you.
One thing you should know is that for people to understand your problem statements, your background of study must be very, very, very clear. Okay, the procedures, the guidelines, people need to understand them so that when you begin to state your problem, they understand already the background of the study, so that way they can flow with you. So primarily what statement problem is all about is trying to tell us the state of things okay, now within your context, okay, and then clearly giving us how they differentiate these discrepancies between the former things and the current state of things now. Now, you're trying to primarily tell us how it has been in the previous stats, previous studies, and then you are trying to create a weakness out of those researches, out of those previous works, and then trying to create a clear gap in that research, in the previous researches. Okay, so this is a typical example of a statement problem. First of all, you're talking about the current state of things. Okay, those highlighted in green are the current state of research. So it's primarily defining some key terms and then making an argument out of it. I made a first statement and I made a little argument of it, and then further a little by adding some parameters that are needed in the topic, to make my argument. Then I also further made current research about it, and then I finalized with an argument, okay, that despite the potential significance of these biomarkers, there is a little knowledge or data correlating their level with clinical severity of sickle cell patients. That's the argument. There should be a sharp contrast. Okay, that's what statement of problem should be. There should be a sharp contrast between the previous work and your current study. If there is no sharp contrast, then that's not a statement of problem. So, but that's by the way. So once you're done with your statement of problem, the next thing should be your research question. Research question is based on your problem statement. So it's just all about breaking down your statement of problem into little nuggets that can be easily accessed. Okay, you know, statement of problem is kind of wider. It's kind of a big statement, but in a research question, you have to break it down into small questions that can be able to culminate into solving that statement of problem, into solving that problem you're trying to address. So if a research question should be gotten from your statement of problem. So this is an example based on this statement of problem I crafted two. Most times it's good that you keep your research questions very specific and brief, okay, depending on your school supervisor. Next is your main objectives. Okay, now it depends on the school. I always recommend whenever you're about to write a proposal, go to the department or the faculty where you are studying, get a template from supervisors or from those they have supervised, from your supervisor or those they've supervised, and that way you can be able to know the exact templates. Notice that when crafting your specific objective, which is under the main objectives, you need to be very specific, as the name implies, and then show that it's measurable and attainable and realistic. Next should be the limitation of study. Okay, now you're primarily trying to say specifically what your research will cover, the areas your research will cover. Now, if, for instance, that you're only covering adults, you're only covering children, these are areas that you have to mention them specifically. Then we talk about the key terms, definition of terms. This is where you begin to define the key terms in your word. For example, we talk about what a sickle cell disease is, talk about steady state, then we talk about the parameters used in the research, which is interleukin and ACR. Okay, once you're done with that, the next step should be your literature review, which is a separate chapter on its own. This is where you now discuss based on your objectives. Okay, literature review should be discussed based on your objectives, and also discuss what is already known, okay, in the key terms in your research. So you are practically trying to break it down into understandable terms, into various forms that topic is all about. So to make it lengthy, you might need to discuss based on the objectives, okay, of your study. That way you can be very more elaborate, and that's what literature review is all about, being elaborate on your topic and your title. You can as well add the conceptual framework the theoretical framework and the empirical framework depending on your department or your school. So in methodology, there are different things to discuss. First is your study design. You have to tell us specifically what type of research. Experimental, it could be a descriptive, it could be a case study. Like our case is a correlational study. Some can be a cross-sectional study in the sense that you're collecting samples concurrently from people. Retrospective study, it could be a prospective study. So these are what you should specify on your research design. For example, this correlation or study was carried out to assess the blood level of this to severity in anemia, sickle cell anemia. So primarily that's what you're doing in your methodology. Okay. Now next is to tell us the area, the settings where your research should be carried on. Okay, this is where you'll be conducting your research. For us, our case will be studying in a teaching hospital in a location called Anambra in Nigeria. So that's the location of our study. Now your own location might be among children in orphanages, among whatever be the case, among women, among employees, whichever be the case, mention it in this study area. Okay, and then study participants. Okay, this is where you now tell us your target audience, who should be included in your study and who should be excluded in your study. This is where you now talk more of the techniques to be used. Most of the time I see people making the mistake of using more than 2 sampling methods. I think statisticians recommend to use maximum of 2 sampling techniques, of which simple random sampling could be one of them. Okay, whichever sampling technique you use, it's best to avoid bias. Use one and then add it to simple random sampling. That way you can be able to make a much more unbiased research. Okay, you also talk about the research size, sample size, okay, that you'll be using. Okay, it can be either qualitative or quantitative depending on your study. Okay, so we're talking about the study variables. Now this is where you talk about variables in your study. The data will be collected. What's the makeup, the social demographic data, the factors that are involved. What samples are you collecting? We'll be collecting their blood sample, you'll be collecting their age, be collecting maybe their urine for those working on raw data and human subjects. So these are things that should be mentioned in your study variable. Data collection tool. Here you describe how you will collect those data. Okay, it could be a qualitative data of which you'll be using interviews or focus groups of professionals, or it could be use of questionnaires, a quantitative data, or a lab data. Maybe you're a professional, okay, that works on samples in a hospital setting. So these are things that should be included in your data collection tool. We need to know how you will collect those data. Okay, then you have to discuss also the data analysis plan. Okay, how will you analyze your data? These are things that should be very specific. Now the reason for all this is so that when someone picks your proposal, even if they are not experts in the field and know expressly what you're working on, the permissions, maybe you have to write the hospital, you have to write the community or the government body, okay, just to get approval before you can begin to work on human subjects, either using a questionnaire or collecting the data. You have to get approval. Okay, you also have to give the participants informed consent. Okay, and also inform them of how their data will be handled. Are you going to expose their name, of which of course you shouldn't? Okay, so you have to tell them how you handle their data and their informations. Then you talk about the budget. Now this is very crucial. The budget is an aspect that you should be very, very careful, especially if you are doing a graduate program. Okay, this is an area that you should be very, very careful to mention, and especially if you will be needing a grant. If you're applying for a grant, this is where you have to be very specific. And mind you, anything you mention here for the research, you must justify them carefully. You have to justify every expense you make. For example, you might need a test kit. For us, we use the test kits that cost a lot, so we needed to be very specific on the quantity we need, the cost, unit cost, okay, the equipment we need, the palliatives of subjects, the photocopy, the printing, the transport, the contingencies. These are things that should be part of the budget. Next thing should be your time frame or timeline. Okay, now this is simply mapping out the schedule. Okay, especially if you're also going for a graduate program, this should be very, very clear, as this will guide you and your supervisor on your program. Now you should know that you are the one, for those going for a graduate program, you are the one that should be in charge of your program. If not, you might be delayed in your program. As much as you can, have a time frame and carry your supervisor along. Be humble, but be the one on the driver's seat. Okay, make sure that you are carrying your supervisor along. You are the one running the program, not your supervisor. So as much as you can, carry them along with each of the stage of your project. Okay, keep communication very strong, especially if you're going for a graduate program. Okay, now time frame should include a crafting of your topic, when time, it could be a month, everything should just be stated here. And then the time frame it will take you to craft a proposal. Okay, and then your proposal defense, the date should be clear from your department, of course. Then data collection, data analysis, final drafts, submission of supervisor, submission to the advisory committee, and then the final defense day. Everything should be very clear. Okay, and then finally the significance of your study. What's your study all about? And then the referencing, okay, where you arrange all your referencing, okay, according to either the upper style or the Harvard style, or whatever style that your school or department desires. Okay, and then finally the appendices, where you are now attaching your questionnaires, a copy of the permission letter, a copy of the informed consent. So that's it for today. I will see you when I see you.